Hello everybody, RagingLevine here, and I'd like to welcome you back to another Commander Deck Tech. Today we're going to be taking a look at Kelsien the Plague. We're going to showcase the power of pingers with this very interesting new commander from the Commander 2020 product. Kelsien may be the new king of ping. Let's take a look at this deck. Obviously, let's start by talking about our commander, Kelsien the Plague, a red, a white, and a black for a 2/2 legendary human assassin with vigilance and haste. It gets +1/+1 for each experience counter you have, so the much-touted return of experience counters happening with this card. Tap. Kelsien deals 1 damage to target creature you don't control. When that creature dies this turn, you get an experience counter. So Kelsien can't shoot your own stuff, so no making an army of tokens and then pinging that down to grow your commander. But Kelsien's interesting, has vigilance and haste, so the turn it comes down, it can attack and then ping something, which is pretty cool. If you can start getting in some commander damage with Kelsien and then continuing to grow it with the experience counters, well, that does seem like the play pattern we're looking for here. So let's take a look at the supporting cast and see how we can make Kelsien work. Obviously, supporting him with other pingers is a solid choice. Not only do they act on their own, pinging players, sometimes pinging other creatures, but they help Kelsien out and help him destroy larger creatures that he might not be able to take down on his own. Goblin Sharpshooter, great at dealing with mountains and mountains of tokens. Also helps team up with Kelsien again and again to take down multiple creatures per turn if Kelsien can untap somehow. We'll see that in a little bit. Volshock Sorcerer, having haste is great. Cunning Spark Mage, kind of the same deal here. Blood Cultist, the odd one out, cannot hit players, but grows over time. I thought that was interesting, so I threw Blood Cultist in here, along with these 3 mono-red pingers. Now we get to some of the larger pingers. Kumano Master Yamabushi is a card you have to be careful with because it will exile its victims, so use only in necessary situations, target players with it, funnel your extra mana into it, exile things that need to be exiled, and let Kelsien get credit for the kills on other things so that you can get those experience counters. Deathbringer Thoktar, obviously also sweet with Kelsien when something dies. Not only do you get that experience counter, you get another +1/+1 counter on the Thoktar, and then you can use that to shoot down another creature, potentially. Of course, giving Deathbringer Thoktar Death Touch, as with any of these pingers, is a great way to handle a board. And don't worry, we're going to be making good use of that interaction. But before we do that, let's talk about a couple of other creatures with activated abilities that we're going to be playing. Royal Assassin, of course, here to destroy tapped creatures. Avatar of Woe and Visara the Dreadful can both destroy any creature, and that creature can't be regenerated. These are here not only as removal, but also to support Kelsien itself. You see, if you ping something and then kill it with one of these, it's just the same as if Kelsien had killed it himself as far as getting the experience counter, and that's what we're after. We're here to grow our commander and try to deal some lethal commander damage with it by clearing the way with all of these pingers, helping him out, getting more experience. So these creatures are going to be instrumental in getting more experience counters. I did mention we were going to be granting Death Touch to our pingers, Kelsien included, and these are some of the ways we're going to do that. Onyx Mage obviously can hand out Death Touch on a turn-by-turn basis. Ankle Shanker gives it to the whole team once per turn, and Void Beckoner, pretty interesting. Usually you're going to cycle this card. I don't envision playing the 8-mana 8/8 in most circumstances. I usually am going to want to cycle this onto my commander in this deck list, give it that Death Touch counter, and just let it keep shooting things down. There are a couple of other ways to give Death Touch to the whole team. Odric can take Death Touch from one of our creatures and give it to the entire squad, as well as some of these other abilities. Archetype of Finality, no real work needed, just give everybody Death Touch, and your opponents can't have it if that's somehow occasionally relevant. Sometimes we won't have Death Touch on all of our pingers, and that's okay. That's why we have these creatures here to finish the job. Vraska's Finisher, great because it can hit creatures or planeswalkers that have taken damage this turn. Orzhov Euthanist has that Haunt ability that will be useful once in a blue moon, and Lurking Deadeye with that Flash is probably the best of the bunch. Of course, this wouldn't be a sweet Mardu deck if we couldn't benefit from the deaths of many creatures, and that's why Harvester of Souls and Athreos Shroudveiled are here. Harvester of Souls, of course, giving us some card advantage, and Athreos taking the creatures we kill and turning them to our side. Of course, with all these pingers, it'd be nice to play something that we might actually enjoy pinging, so I present to you these 3 creatures that we might actually just want to shoot down ourselves. Now, keep in mind that Kelsien can't shoot down creatures we control, but it can shoot down Humble Defector once we've given it away and benefited from drawing 2 cards. Kinda cool, you draw 2 cards, you hand it off to somebody, you shoot it down, you get the experience counter. Seems like a big ball of value to me. Meanwhile, Trapjaw Tyrant and Needletooth Raptor, great at eliminating opposing creatures and sort of amplifying these pings. Our last creature is a pretty sweet one, Grateful Apparition. Doesn't look like much, a 1/1 flyer, just kind of pecks in there, but the Proliferate is a pretty big deal. We're not just adding more counters to ourselves. Those experience counters, of course, are very valuable, but cards like Deathbringer Thoktar also play with counters. There's a little tiny small counter sub-theme. Blood Cultist gets counters. There's some other cards in here that get counters. So the Proliferate is very much welcome, not just for our experience counters, but also for those little splash benefits as well. Of course, any deck with a lot of pingers is also going to want a lot of equipment that grants Death Touch, and here we have 4 of the best. Basilisk Collar, Quietus Spike, Gorgon Flail, and Gorgon's Head. Basilisk Collar's upside, obviously, is that lifelink. Quietus Spike, nice if you can get through, and don't worry, we've got a couple of ways to sneak creatures through, of course, since our commander wants to deal damage in combat. Gorgon Flail, giving that +1/+1, and Gorgon's Head, just nice and cheap. Looks worse than Basilisk Collar, obviously, for the same cost, but at a certain point, redundancy is what you need. And a couple of enchantments giving Death Touch. Gift of Doom, one of my favorite cards from Commander 2019. We're not going to be morphing this a whole lot because sacrificing creatures is not really where we want to be. I honestly think mostly this will get cast on our commander, give it Death Touch and Indestructible, which is a great way to keep it around. Meanwhile, Return to Hagra, giving cards we have Death Touch turn after turn after turn. Occasionally we'll have to trigger the second mode, but that's for the dire times. Or if somebody's at 1, I suppose. Of course, with all these pingers and ways to give them Death Touch, we're going to want to amplify the use of these activated abilities here. And that's what these artifacts are for. 1,000-Year Elixir, giving them Pseudo Haste, untapping something. Umbral Mantle, letting us pay 3 to untap it. Mage Right Stone, another way to untap one of those creatures. And Illusionist Bracers, just amplifying that ability by doubling it. And with all of these creatures scheduled to die, we might as well benefit from their deaths, right? Scythe of the Wretched lets us pick those creatures back up out of the graveyard and put them into play under our control. Grave Betrayal, very much the same idea. And Black Market giving us more and more mana per turn as creatures die. This section of equipment is a little different from the first section because these are cards that we really want to equip to Kelsien, really want on our commander. Thornbite Staff. We don't really care so much about granting the pinging ability. We care a lot more about untapping whenever a creature dies. So attaching Thornbite Staff to Kelsien is a great way to generate a lot of experience counters in a very short time if you can also give it Death Touch. Helm of the Host obviously makes a lot of copies of Kelsien, gives us the opportunity to get a lot of taps in, a lot of experience counters each turn. Even if they don't have Death Touch, that's okay. Multiple Kelsiens can take down larger creatures fairly quickly. Whisper Silk Cloak, of course, giving it Shroud and making it unable to be blocked, lets us sneak it in for that sweet commander damage that we crave. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Shadow Spear, one of the best commander cards to come out of Theros Beyond Death. This unassuming 1 mana equipment doesn't just give our creature a boost. Its most important ability is that activation right in the middle that gets rid of Hexproof and Indestructible. These abilities are the bane of decks like ours that depend on damage to get rid of things. So Shadow Spear just erases all that nonsense. And if all of our ways to give our creatures Death Touch weren't enough, may I present to you a classic, Death Pits of Wrath. 3 black for an enchantment. Whenever any creature is dealt damage, destroy it. That creature can't be regenerated this turn. Of course, that's global, so it applies to our creatures, but the whole point of global effects is to be able to use them better than your opponents, and I think that's what we're looking at here. Witch's Mist, meanwhile, another way to finish off creatures a la Vraska's Finisher and the cards we saw before, but it's usable turn after turn after turn. Not a card you see a lot in Commander, so don't be surprised if your friends pick this one up, read it, put it down, and then pick it up again and go, wait a minute, this enchantment taps? Has an activated ability? What's going on here? Even when you're sticking so hard to a theme like we are, you're going to need some card draw, and that's where Phyrexian Arena and Outpost Siege come in for us. A little extra card draw each of our upkeeps helps keep the engine running. And, of course, sometimes we're just not going to have a board. We're not going to have those pingers available to us, and that's where some of our spot removal comes in. Of course, you could ping something and then blow it up with one of these cards, get that experience counter. Don't make that mistake with Anguished Unmaking, though. Of course, that exiles a permanent. Sometimes that needs to be done, and it's more important to not have it go to the graveyard than it is to get that experience counter. But the rest of these work pretty well with that, including Crackling Doom, as long as you know exactly which creature an opponent's going to sacrifice, because it's the only one they have with the highest power. It's not tied. Or you can use Kelsien to force them to sacrifice the one you want. Maybe there's a little political game to be played, but I would try to use it on the creature you know the player's going to sacrifice. Go wide removal options, Austere Command, of course, a classic, and Vandal Blast, just knocking out artifacts across the table. This card kind of falls in its own category, right? Right of the Raging Storm, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, we'll give them a 5/1. And with all of our pingers, it's very easy to take down those 5/1s, and you can let your opponent attack, maybe do some damage, see how blocks go, and if it's about to die or we're getting to the end of the turn and the trigger goes on the stack, you just zap it in response, get your sweet Kelsien trigger. I think this card is very cool in this deck, giving away some 5/1s that not only can't attack us, but also give us more advantages. I like that a lot. And as I mentioned before, we have a counter theme here in this deck, not just the experience counters, but some of those other cards, Black Market, Blood Cultist, and of course, Deathbringer Thokdar, we're going to want to proliferate. And here are some of the all-stars in our deck that are going to help us do that. Sword of Truth and Justice, of course, probably going on our commander. Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine, also helping us get rid of pesky indestructible creatures when Shadow Spear isn't available, or in the case of Contagion Engine, really just wiping somebody's board most likely. And Spread the Sickness, a nice extra piece of spot removal that also proliferates. Now we're into some of the mana rocks here. We've got the classic 1, 2, 3 punch of the Commander deck. Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Commander's Sphere. Be prepared to see these cards in lots and lots of decks. Commander's Sphere often makes it into 3-color decks, might not make it into 1 or 2-color decks most likely, but when you've got a 3-color deck, if you've got a Commander's Sphere to hand, I would slot it in. Then we've got the classic Ravnica Signets, Boros, Orzhov, and Rakdos all represented here. And now we're into the mana base. Here are some of the stronger lands, the lands that are capable of producing, in most cases, all 3 kinds of mana that we need. Command Tower, Savai Triumph, and Nomad Outpost all guaranteed, with Exotic Orchard obviously not totally a guarantee, but it'll usually hit at least 2 of them. Then we've got the Shock lands, of course. These are great because you can fetch them up with the classic fetch lands. They can come into play tapped when you need them and enter the battlefield untapped when you want to pay that extra life. Temples are great at smoothing things out, and they're pretty easy to get your hands on, so I've included all 3 here. Of course, any mana base you want to put together with the lands you have should be sufficient as long as you include enough lands, especially enough dual lands. Just make sure you're prepared to play tapped lands quite a lot if you can't get your hands on some of these pricier ones. It's a little harder to fit cycling lands into these 3-color mana bases, so I try to do my best to approximate with cards like Silent Clearing and Sunbaked Canyon from Modern Horizons. Of course, Canyon Slough from Amonkhet having cycling, part of that half-finished cycle of cycling dual lands. I like those very much. Fabled Passage and Prismatic Vista, both great at picking up some of our extra basic lands when they're needed. And Arid Mesa, Marsh Flats, and Bloodstained Mire, fantastic at going to get those shock lands or a basic land in a more dire time. Now we hit the utility lands. Vault of the Archangel can give the whole team Death Touch, which is great when your team is ready to ping. Bajuka Bog obviously getting rid of pesky graveyards, and Karn's Bastion continuing to enable that counter theme. Buried Ruin helps us pick up some of those important artifacts. Lots of equipment in this deck, so Buried Ruin, a welcome card to draw. Hall of Heliod's Generosity, picking up some of the sweet enchantments we're packing as well. And Reliquary Tower padding out our hand size. Shore things up with 8 basic lands, 2 plains, 3 mountains, 3 swamps, and you've got yourself a deck list. That's all I've got for you today on Kelsien. I hope you have fun pinging down your opponent's boards and crashing in for huge amounts of commander damage by amassing tons of experience counters. If you like this one, check it out at bit.ly/RagingLevine Kelsien. That is, of course, a case-sensitive URL, so make sure to capitalize the R, the L, and the K there. Those are all important. I'm going to have more Commander deck techs for you soon. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to press all the good buttons on this video so I can feel the good feelings in the social media apocalypse, and I'll see you next time.